You're listening to Public Sector Voices with Emily Rodgers. On today's show, we're joined by Cllr Nick Forbes CBE, leader of Newcastle City Council. Nick has been instrumental in representing local government and their economies through a decade of austerity and has worked to secure devolution packages and city deals through the combined authority. Great to have you on the show, Nick. How have you found being in this position at this time?
Well, they say it's a curse in China to live in interesting times, but the last 10 years have been, I think, the most extraordinary period in local government. And it's been a privilege and a huge challenge to have been leader since 2011 through such a turbulent time. We've had a decade of austerity. We've had major changes like the Brexit referendum and several general elections. We've had major cultural and social changes. And of course, we've now got the COVID crisis. So there's never a dull moment in local government. And I do sometimes feel as though I never know quite what the day is going to bring. I'm always slightly relieved when I get to the end of the day that it hasn't been quite a disaster that it might have been.
Well, that's a reflection on you. Obviously, you put out all the fires before they happen.
Well, I do sometimes think that the role of leader of the council, there's no formal job description, of course, so it's very much the kind of role that you make of it. I do sometimes think that the role is really about trying to stop people doing silly things before they get you into trouble.
I like that.
And councils are big organisations, multi-million pound budgets, thousands of staff, and any organisation like that has its own challenges. But the council has a tendency to bring me what I call dead birds. Things that people have done that they think is the right thing to do, and you think, oh, why did you do that?
I've never heard that analogy before, but I like it a lot.
Well, it's like. I don't know if you have a cat, but cats occasionally bring dead birds that they caught in the garden, as if to say, "Here's a present for you. Please accept this with my greetings." And you think, oh, hell, the cat's just brought another dead bird in.
But over the past, let's say, 8 or 9 weeks, have you found any kind of additional pressure with you being the leader, or has everybody kind of joined forces?
Oh, no. I mean, the last few weeks have been incredibly challenging. And I guess any local authority leader will be in the same position, partly because we're in uncharted territory nationally, and we are having to a certain extent, make up stuff as we go along. But I have to say, compounded by a government that has a tendency to make announcements without thinking through the detail on the ground and leaving us in a position where we're having to pick up the pieces, second-guessing in the dark without knowing quite whether we're getting it right or not. And that's been immensely stressful. Plus, of course, just the level of uncertainty that has been around means that people are sort of desperately looking for clear answers. And often people turn to the local authority to give those answers. It's quite interesting that we've had a decade of local government being underfunded and undervalued, yet in a real time of crisis, it's the body that everybody turns to for information, support and coordination.
That's exactly right. It's what I found as well. And I mean, especially where you are, Newcastle and the North East in general, it's got so much history and heritage. I mean, what is it about the place that you love so much, and what makes it so special to lead that city?
Well, I grew up in the North East, in a little village in County Durham, which is about 30 miles away from Newcastle. And Newcastle, when I was growing up, was the big city to go to. We came a couple of times a year, once for school uniform shopping and once for Christmas shopping. Coming into Newcastle was a really exciting thing to do. And there's something about Newcastle that it's a magnetic city. It's got the most extraordinary compact city centre, which is really stunningly beautiful. And coupled with the very warm welcome that people here give to visitors, I think it's an absolutely fantastic place. And of course, it does have a lot of history and heritage. People tend to think of Newcastle in the Industrial Revolution and the shipbuilding and coal mining. But actually, Newcastle's history goes a lot further back than that. And the city was originally founded as a defensive fort by Hadrian when he was building Hadrian's Wall. So the original Latin name for Newcastle was Ponsalius, Hadrian's Bridge. And the other thing that really surprises me is the number of people that don't know that Newcastle has a castle. And it's a very grand building that you see when you come into the train station.
So it does what it says on the tin.
It does what it says on the tin. And it was built and demolished and built and demolished. And the castle that's there now is the third one that was built in about 1180. Which is why the city got the name of Newcastle.
That's amazing. I had no idea.
And it's amazing how many people live in Newcastle and say, does Newcastle have a castle? It's like, the clue's in the name.
Hopefully they'll know now because they'll have listened to this show. Can you tell us then about the response and the way that Newcastle has responded to the crisis?
Yes. Well, there are a number of things that we've done as a council. And there are a number of things that have happened in the city, which I think demonstrate our city's values and principles. So as a council, it's quite astonishing, really. For a big organisation with a lot of statutory services, we've in effect turned the organisation on a sixpence and focused it almost entirely on keeping our streets clean and tidy and supporting vulnerable people at the time of the crisis. Now, of course, we did both of those before, but we've had a whole new area of responsibility. So, for example, one of the things that we've been doing is providing several thousand people with food parcels because they're having to self-isolate. That meant setting up a completely new system for distributing food, for people ordering it, for making sure we've taken into account people's dietary requirements, all of those things. And what's been fantastic is that we've put the... of course, we've suspended our city centre parking and our car parks. So what we've been doing is having the food distributed by the parking enforcement officers. The staff in the council have been absolutely magnificent, really flexible at a time of crisis. And I'm so proud of what they've been doing.
Yeah, because it is those little things as well that do keep the area ticking on. When you mention keeping it clean and tidy, people might not think that's a very important thing. But I know around my area, with the tips being closed and bins being disrupted, the collection days being disrupted, it has been a real problem. Well,
we're very proud of the fact that we've actually got almost 100% bin collections. We've not had a dip at all in bin collections. One of the things that we've done, obviously, it's difficult for people to socially distance in a bin lorry, in the cab of a bin lorry.
Yeah.
And of course, in another bit of the council, our school transport service, the taxis that we pay for to get kids with disabilities and kids with particular needs to and from school, of course, they've been on hold. So what we've done is redeploy the taxis to carry the bin men. So you have somebody driving the lorry and somebody following behind it in one of these big taxis, socially distancing with that driver. And that has meant that we've been able to socially distance the bin staff, make sure we keep up the collections, and continue to support the taxi drivers, most of whom are self-employed, at a time when otherwise they might have lost their income. So
it's win-win.
Absolutely win-win. And that's the kind of creative thinking that I think Newcastle is really good at. The other thing that I'm immensely proud of is just the way that communities in the city have really come together. You see this with people collecting for the food banks outside St James's Park at home matches, week in, week out. But the way that we've had several thousand people stepping forward to volunteer to help out, I think has been absolutely magnificent. And I'm just so overjoyed that I live and have the privilege to lead a city which has such caring nature in its DNA.
Yeah, it really, you love to see it, don't you?
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. And one of the things Geordies aren't shy of is talking to people. Of course, there's a good chance that if you get your food parcel delivered by one of our parking enforcement officers or your medication dropped off by one of our museum staff, good chance you'll be there for half an hour while somebody tells you their life story. But the way that the communities in the city have come together has been, I think, absolutely brilliant. That
kind of conversation will be crucial at a time like this with people isolating, so it really is a nice extra.
Well, I also think it reveals something about the role of the state. Local government in this country is relatively weak structurally. We have a very centralised state. We have very, very few taxes determined at a local level. 95% of the tax income is determined by central government, which is very different to virtually every other European country. And one of the things that I think has been highlighted through this crisis is, if anybody thinks that government is about ministers sitting behind desks in Whitehall, pulling levers of power that then make things happen on the ground, they're completely mistaken. one of the things that has been so crucial to get us through the crisis has been the relationships that the council have with so many different partners, and the way that we've been able to bring people together, convene people, if you like, which is a sort of natural role of the council. It's only the council can do it. And that's been absolutely invaluable to how we've got through the last few weeks.
Absolutely. And going on from that, on our last episode, we had Bob Kerslake on the podcast, and he was talking about, how northern cities and towns are widely underfunded when you compare them to the southeast. So obviously, that's something that you will have experienced as well.
Absolutely. Well, and it's underfunded in a number of ways. So we're underfunded in terms of the council. So the council has had much deeper cuts over the last 10 years than many authorities in the south. So the council's budget, I sometimes describe the council as threadbare, which is not meant to be an insult. It's just a kind of description of an organisation which has been stripped back and stripped back and stripped back, that it's a lot of what it does relies on the goodwill and commitment of staff, which is great, but that's not sustainable. And we've also had, so not just money directly out of the council, of course, many of our other public services have faced a level of austerity, but we've also seen the impact of the welfare reform of the government and the way that that's taken about £100 million out of our city's economy because they've reduced and capped benefits. And of course, we've got a lot of people in Newcastle who are reliant in one form or another on the welfare state. And to lose £100 million over a few years is a very significant economic hit, actually. That's the kind of money that flows through our local neighbourhoods, keeps corner shops open, means people have a bit of extra spending money in their local community. And a lot of that is drying up.
And I know that Newcastle is working hard to kind of attract new business and investment into the city to solve things like that. But this will have halted it, I'm sure. What can you tell us about the future of Newcastle? Is there anything exciting that we should know about, or anything you want to tell us?
Oh, I'm really ambitious about the future of Newcastle. And I think actually this crisis is a fantastic opportunity to bring about change in a way that opportunities for change don't really come along that often. Newcastle was redesigned in the 1960s around the motor car. It was thought that car was king and that cars were going to be the future. And virtually the entire city centre was redesigned for people to drive around.
Yeah.
And we're still living with that legacy now. One of the things that's been absolutely wonderful about walking around the city has been, in a city with fewer cars, how much nicer it is, how much less pollution there is, how better the air quality is. And what I don't want to do is, having seen all of those cars come out of the city centre, I don't want to let them all back in again.
Absolutely.
It's much harder to take people through a journey of change if they have to go right the way back to the beginning and work all the way through it. So what we're doing, we're doing some temporary measures which are experimental, but I hope very much that they'll be permanent when we've tweaked them and made them right. We're extending the pedestrianised areas of the city centre. We're suspending a lot of the on-street parking in the city centre to try to remove cars from the streets. We are going to pedestrianise Grey Street, which is for people that know Newcastle, that's the beautiful sweeping street that curves from the monument at the top of the hill right the way down to the river at the bottom of the hill. And designed by Richard Granger, it's one of the most beautiful streets in England. But because it's got parking on both sides, it's probably more accurate to describe it as the most beautiful car park in England at the moment. So, I'm really keen that we transform the city centre, get people to think differently about the city centre space. And also, this is something that we've been doing for a while now, but I think we need to accelerate it, making sure that we've got good walking and cycling facilities for people to move around in.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've noticed over the last 3 months or so is a huge increase in the number of people cycling around Newcastle, which is fantastic, but we need to make sure that they're safe when they do that, and that we have proper demarcation on the roads so that cyclists aren't fighting for space with motorists.
Definitely. I've recently started cycling to work for the same reason. Manchester has done the same in terms of making things pedestrian cycle friendly, but there are a lot of the roads between my house and my work that are not cycle lanes, and you do feel so much more comfortable when you're in your own marked area.
Yes, absolutely. And it's really important that we don't turn the clock back, but we look forward. So it's pretty clear that we were starting to move away from the old economy, which was very reliant on fossil fuels and very much about exploitation of the natural world. And we already had, before the coronavirus crisis, had really ambitious plans for Newcastle to become net carbon neutral by 2030. And I think what we've got to do is accelerate that. So I think there's a whole new generation of jobs to be created from the goods and products and services that will help us to become carbon neutral. And if there's going to be a hit on things like the retail and leisure sector, then what we need to be able to do is retrain people who might be at risk of losing their jobs in those sectors to do the new jobs that we're creating in the green collar world. And that for me is hugely exciting, that the idea that we would think as a city about moving towards net zero with all of the challenges that faces, but I think really important for the future of the planet.
Definitely, and for the labour market as well, taking those people with you on that journey.
Well, labour markets are never static, and we've always got to be thinking about, so what's the next thing that we need to be capitalising on? One of the things that Newcastle was renowned for in the Industrial Revolution was not just a place where things were made, but a place where things were invented and made. So you had design and production in the same place. Probably best encapsulated by Stephenson's works and the steam locomotive engines that he made. We've kind of got used to the idea that people might have ideas, but then they're commercialised somewhere else. And what we want to do is bring that back to Newcastle. So part of our strategy, part of what we're trying to do is help create more spin-out businesses from the intellectual work that our universities do, because there's no point having people doing research in a vacuum. It has to be about changing life for the better, improving the quality of people's lives. So translating all of that research in our universities into practical things that will make people's lives better is one of the things that I think will be the hallmark of Newcastle for the future. And we've got a couple of national centres here, which people might not know about because they've only just been established in the last couple of years. We've got the National Innovation Centre for Ageing and Vitality and the National Innovation Centre for Data. And both of those, I think, are extraordinary opportunities for us to think very differently about how people will need support to live their lives in the future. We tend to think of people who are older as somehow a drain on resources, a drain on the state. But actually, they're huge assets. And part of the Centre for Ageing and Vitality is thinking about how do we ensure that people don't just live longer by adding years to life, but also live better by adding life to years. Yeah,
I like that. The other thing as well about what you were saying, designing and making within the country, if this virus has taught us anything, it's that it's a risk to rely on other countries, because when travel is down, you're stuck if you get everything from elsewhere.
Yes, and I mean, one of the things that, Newcastle has many strengths, but one of the things that Newcastle doesn't really have is much of its own food supply. We tend to import stuff from other places. In fact, quite a lot of the food for the north of England comes in through Newcastle Airport or through the Port of Tyne. But I think we need to be thinking about how can we encourage people to be more self-sustaining. We've got in my council ward, for example, a fabulous community project called Greening Arthur's Hill, where people are growing vegetables in terraced backyards. It's called Vertical Veg, and it's part of the edible food movement.
I've seen a lot of that recently.
Yeah, and that's the idea that it's kind of reconnecting people with nature. So instead of just going out and buying, assuming that the supermarkets will have whatever food you want whenever, getting people to understand seasonality, getting people to enjoy the challenge of growing their own veg and their own fruit. And it's working really well. It's very exciting to see people doing that. And of course, it's another thing that brings communities together because people share information, advice, tips, can just talk about what's happening. It's the kind of thing that
It's the social aspect as well.
Exactly, yeah. You couldn't design a project better, I think, to build strong communities.
And speaking of the strong communities, I know that you've worked a lot with city deals and kind of securing those through the combined authorities. And I know that you have been a council leader at a time when we've had combined authorities and a time that when we haven't. What can you tell us about how the region has benefited from having that type of organisation?
Well, for me, the combined authority is putting a flag in the ground for devolution. The kind of critique I've got of the way that the Conservative government under George Osborne and then successive ministers approached devolution was that they saw it almost exclusively through an economic lens. So what we have in our current combined authorities and mayoral combined authorities are a series of economic transactional functions which have been devolved from central government. But I think devolution works best when it's about economic powers, social reform, public sector reform, and a sense of strong identity. And I think there's a lot of work to do to, even for those parts of England that have combined authorities, to make sure that they're not just basically grant administering bodies, but they're actually leading change, leading the economy forward, leading social change forward, and providing a strong sense of identity for the communities that they represent. And early days, that's why I say it was about planting a flag for devolution, because the North East has had a few bad starts to devolution. We had the referendum on the Regional Assembly back in 2004, and of course that was rejected. And yet everything tells me that you can't run a country just from one city. You've got to have local decision-making. You've got to have local powers. You've got to have the ability to determine, to a certain extent, your own future as a city.
It seems like a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah, and that's why I think the combined authorities are an important step forward in that. Of course, they're not perfect, but they're a lot better than they were. And of course, in a time of austerity, when we've seen quite a lot of budgets slashed and councils really struggling, actually the £600 million investment fund is the only significant fund that we've been able to bring into the region to ensure we can continue to grow the economy.
Yeah, and at a time like this, we need that.
Well, the thing that has always driven me in politics is I think a good society is founded when people have good, decent, well-paid jobs where they feel secure, are able to put down roots, raise a family, be part of something bigger. And sadly, we've got quite a lot of exploitation going on, either in temporary contracts or 0 hours contracts, or people being encouraged to be self-employed rather than employed. And I think we've got it's been highlighted actually by the coronavirus crisis. I think we've got quite a fragile employment structure in this country. People feel quite insecure, I think. And that's why the two pillars of what we're seeking to achieve in the future economy. One is that net zero carbon approach. The other is what we call an inclusive economy, where people, regardless of what they do, feel that they have a stake in the future and that they're not being exploited for their labour. And that, for me, is a really important principle, because I think if people feel happy and secure in their work, they feel happy and secure in their community, and reduces so many tensions. And of course, when I was growing up in the North East, mass unemployment was a huge problem. And we've lived with the corrosive fallout of mass unemployment for decades now. And it would be a real shame if one of the things that happened as a result of the coronavirus crisis was that we started to see a big spike in unemployment again.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's absolutely crystal clear that you love Newcastle, but I have to ask, is there anything from other cities that you see and you wish you had for Newcastle?
Ooh. Well, one of the things that you really notice when you go to other cities, and you're kind of blind to it in the place where you live normally, but the cities that you go and visit can either be really nice places to walk around, or they can be really awful with lots of traffic and noise and pollution everywhere. And the nicer cities are the ones that have really nice clean streets, open spaces, greenery, and where traffic is kept to an absolute minimum. And that's the thing that I want to achieve for Newcastle, to kind of restructure, because it's a very small city comparatively. You can walk across the city centre from top to bottom or left to right in about 20 minutes. So it's not a big city, but I think if we could crack that, then that would be a legacy that I'd be really proud of.
Definitely. So to finish off then, obviously Newcastle aside, where is your favourite place in England?
Ooh, my favourite place.
No, curveball.
Ooh. Well, one of the joys of living in Newcastle is that we're only 15 or 30 minutes from some of the best beaches in England. And if you've ever been to Whitley Bay or Cullercoats or Blythe or further up to Druridge Bay, you have these amazing, some of them are miles and miles long, big sandy beaches, which are absolutely fantastic to walk along. And I love being by the sea.
Yeah, me too. If only we had the weather.
Yeah, I've always said if I didn't live in a city, I'd want to live by the sea. So on a summer's evening, it's only about 15 minutes to get out to the coast on a summer's evening to go and have an ice cream by the sea. And the thing that I love doing most at weekends is getting out up onto the beaches in Northumberland and feeling the wind in your face and hearing the crashing of the waves and enjoying the wildlife.
Yeah, and hopefully soon we can all go out and enjoy that again. Thank you so much for speaking to us and all of the great work that you're doing. I've really enjoyed it.
Not at all. Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
On next week's episode, we'll be joined by Councillor Fiona Venner, Executive Member for Children and Families at Leeds City Council. See you then.